Hello, this is Edward Douglas from Cinema Daily US. I'm here to review Marvel Studios' latest MCU movie, Thunderbolts. I'll begin this review by saying that Marvel has a lot more to prove right now than in any previous year, because to butcher one of my favorite Clash songs, and I apologize for singing, I'm so bored with the MCU. I'm going to try to avoid spoilers as much as humanly possible. Although if you've watched any of the trailers, you might already know a little bit about the characters and the story in play, because they do a pretty good job representing the movie. More than anything, this is a film that acts as a thematic follow-up or sequel to 2021's Black Widow. It's the second movie in a row to follow up on incidents that happened in the Disney Plus series The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Thunderbolts might be a team, but the movie mostly focuses on Florence Pugh's Yelena Belova, who we saw meeting with Julia Louis-Dreyfus's Valentina Allegra de Fontaine at the end of Black Widow. She then appeared in the Hawkeye miniseries Seeking Revenge for her sister's death. We meet Yelena as she's reached her limits with being a hired assassin, and she's diving off a skyscraper, seemingly to her death. In fact, she's on assignment from Valentina, who is the director of the CIA but is facing a congressional impeachment trial. Sebastian Stan's Bucky Barnes, aka the Winter Soldier, from the 2016 Captain America movie and the Disney Plus series that also bears his name, is now a congressman himself, representing Brooklyn no less. Facing scrutiny in Washington, Valentina tasks her assistant Melanie, played by Geraldine Viswanathan, to clean up all the loose ends. This includes Yelena and other operatives, who all converge and fight at a scientific warehouse, which Valentina then incinerates. But first, they meet the enigmatic Bob, a strange guy played by Lewis Pullman, who they find at the warehouse, but who doesn't seem to know how he got there. Again, I don't want to spoil things, but if you're familiar with the comics, you might be aware that Bob is Robert Reynolds, a character from the Marvel Comics who would be turned into the superhero of the century, who has limitless power and literally could take on an entire Avengers team single-handedly. Since I did bring up the comics, I might as well mention there are Thunderbolts in the comics too. Other than in recent years, the comics bear very little resemblance to the Thunderbolts in the movie, which are pretty much culled from previous MCU's movies. For instance, there's Hannah John Kamen as Ghost, who only appeared in Ant-Man and the Wasp. Wyatt Russell's John Walker, better known as U.S. Agent, first appeared in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier and hasn't been mentioned since. The idea is that these unlikely antiheroes will join together and stand up to Valentina's actions. As we've seen with both Guardians of the Galaxy and Suicide Squad over at DC, he put together such a dysfunctional group, they're eventually going to start squabbling. More than anything else, this continues Yelena's story, as well as giving us a look at her past, which hasn't been covered quite as much as her sister, Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow. If you only get one thing out of this movie, it's that Florence Pugh is an amazing actor, well deserving of all previous accolades. The fact she can bring so much depth to a Marvel hero is huge. I also enjoyed Lewis Pullman as Bob, aka Sentry, which puts a unique spin on the superhero origin story because it shows what happens when someone with bipolar disorder or some other mental health issue is given unlimited power. The relationship between these two characters drives the drama of the movie, which only feels somewhat disjointed because there's so much humor, so many jokes, and a lot of squabbling. Much of the latter involving David Harbour's Red Guardian, aka Yelena's father, and John Walker. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention how the Winter Soldier is becoming such a pivotal part of the MCU over the last few phases. First, with its introduction in the first two Captain America sequels, then in the Disney Plus show, and then finally here. I feel like Marvel has done more interesting things with the character in the movies than in the actual comics. I should note that the Winter Soldier only started leading the Thunderbolts with Valentina in the comics fairly recently. As far as the MCU, he was introduced at the same time and in the same movie as Daniel Bruhl's Zemo, who was the original lead of the Thunderbolts in the comics. This might be nitpicking since most of the people who see Marvel's Thunderbolts won't have read the comics, and they probably won't care about those differences. Director Jake Schreier, who received an Emmy for Netflix's Beef miniseries, does a good job not only keeping the tone balanced, but also keeping the plot moving in the right direction at a brisk pace. There's plenty of action, lots of laughs, and there's a very clear story being told of this unlikely group of working together. By the climactic last act, it really is paying off in a big way, to the point where you really want to see these characters again. Maybe it doesn't work as well as James Gunn's Guardians movies in that sense, but staying so focused does work wonders for this after the last few Marvel movies, including Deadpool and Wolverine, which I thought was a mess. I will give Thunderbolts a solid B rating, which is roughly a 7 out of 10. I generally liked it and might even watch it again, though I feel like Marvel really needs to break away from the formula it seems to have found itself in. That includes Thunderbolts, which borrows liberally from some of the better Avengers movies, as well as the better Guardians of the Galaxy movies. It's not such a bad thing because, as they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.